On this episode of This Week in Space, we're talking about Starliner. It's back. What now? Stay with us.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 128, recorded on September 13th, 2024. Starliner is back. What now? Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space. And this time, it's the Starliner Comedy Hour edition. Yeah, okay, that didn't work. With your host, that egregious expert, Tariq Malik.
Hello, everybody.
Who knows all about Boeing and Starliner.
I got my Starliner shirt on.
I think we should just let him do the whole episode today. I'll see you later. Oh, my God. Oh, you sad man. But welcome, Tariq. It's good to see you today.
You too, Rod. How's it been?
Somebody has to defend the fortress of Boeing. It's okay. We're surrounded by fires, as you can see in the background. Those people are trying to get in.
Yeah, that's the dedication that you show to the podcast, Rod. Is that the
real-time news?
The wildfires are at your gates. And you are here to talk space.
So for those who may or may not know, California is burning down. We have, I think, 38 wired fires of different sizes, 3 large ones in LA County, which at this point, probably 70,000 acres, 80,000 acres. That's a lot. Oh my gosh. With last I checked, something like 30,000 structures threatened, although that was before the wind shifted away. So fortunately, it cooled down. And we got a little bit of humidity with these fire crews. So, for instance, Tariq, you know Southern California, the bridge fire, which is the one closer to me, so that's probably 8 miles away. But, we live in the concrete flatlands, so there's no way it's getting here because there's nothing to burn in Southern California, at least not in the city. But up in the hills there, above Altadena and those foothill communities, the forest between there and Big Bear and Arrowhead Lake, if you remember those mountain towns up there.
We used to go skiing at Big Bear.
So I was looking for a house up there a few years ago, a second house, and I did a little bit of research on fire insurance. Like, oh, you want fire insurance? Well, that's a little problem. So you have to go with a California FAIR plan, and it's gone in the last few years from something like $1,800 a year to $10,000 a year.
$10,000? Oh my God!
$5,000 to $10,000. And that's because that forest hasn't burned in 110 years. And there's about 5 feet of fuel, dry pine needles and stuff lying on the ground. So it's terrifying. So my heart goes out to those folks. And it's not a good time for them.
Please stay safe, everyone. When they say evacuate, please listen. So
okay, but enough with the flames.
Yeah.
All kidding aside, and I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Badass Magazine, Yawn.
Yeah.
All kidding aside, though, we're going to talk about Starliner today because it's back. It's bad. It's badder than ever, and with only one additional thruster failure. But
it's
I'll
on
try
Earth.
to be kind. Now, before we start, I just want to say a little bit of a not even a mea culpa here. It's actually kind of exculpatory, but I talked about this a few weeks ago. I posted a little snarky. I posted an image on Facebook.
Snarky. No.
Of Starliner attached to the space station backwards, covered in vines and looking all old and grungy and stuff. And I got a little bit of pushback from people, more than I expected, actually, who were saying, you don't understand how hard it is to build a spacecraft, and Boeing is awesome, blah, 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 and how could you and all that. It's like, look, guys, first of all, it was just for a gag, right? I make fun of SpaceX too. We make fun of everybody at one time or another. But I mean, it was like touching this hot button of these people, mostly armchair engineers or retirees, just went off like skyrockets. And I want to say, this is just me editorializing a bit. But, if you want to be Boeing fanboys, that's fine. I understand I used to be a Boeing fanboy before, their airplanes started falling apart. But let's just step back for a second. As I've said before, they were there at the beginning of the space program. They, built a big chunk of the Saturn V. They've been a part of everything. But in addition to that, I just want to mention they absorbed North American Aviation, which built the Apollo Command Module and the S2 stage and the space shuttle. They absorbed Rocketdyne, which built the F1 engines for the shuttle and for the Saturn V and the RS-25 engines for the shuttle. So they've absorbed just about every contractor that ever was part of the space race, except for Lockheed Martin and a handful of others. So they ought to have the institutional knowledge and ability to build, I don't know, rockets and stuff, and things like space capsules.
Is this the case to not get canceled, or is this a preamble to say, hey, this is our opinion, this whole episode?
The latter. I mean, it's just, there are reasons to, there's justification, I think, for a little bit of looking askance at an arched eyebrow. So that's all I'm saying. Yeah. Now, I make some jokes about it. That's okay, all fair and good. But, just relax a little bit and let's just give us a little bit of slack for having some justification, because they really kind of screwed this up. And again, with twice as much money almost as SpaceX got to do the same thing. So I wish them well, but, just give me a break. Okay.
Yeah. Are we doing headlines? Or are we going to go straight into Starliner?
Hello? What's that new Boeing CEO? Oh, no, I was just kidding. Okay. Sorry, I called in on the red line. All right.
I didn't know we were supposed to have props, Rod, or I would have prepared a skit and a script and everything.
Next week. Okay, before we start, please don't forget to do us a solid if you're still listening, and make sure to like, subscribe, and other podcast goodies, because we live and die by your love. All right.
Yes.
It is time.
It's time
for our space joke, which this week isn't actually a joke. It's a limerick.
A limerick.
Our first limerick in 128 episodes from Jonathan Waltz. He says via AI. I feel like I should have a music bed for this. Boeing Starliner, oh dear, faced gas leaks that caused quite severe. With each flight delayed, their nerves were all frayed, but they'll fix it and launch by next year.
Oh. If
the audience liked it better than you, partner. All right. Now, I've heard that some folks want to jump in the family car and hide in the garage pretending they're on Starliner for a few months when it's joke time on this show. But you can help. Save yourself from being stranded by our humor, although I really did enjoy that limerick. And send us your best, worst, or most different space joke at twit@twit.tv. Okay, I've managed to gobble up 7 minutes just introducing.
And with your disclaimer about don't come at me, bros.
Yeah, right. So speaking of bros, let's do some headlines.
Yes.
So this week.
Headlines.
There we go. Music. That's new.
So for those of you too old to know, that's what a manual typewriter sounded like in the horrible old days. Did you ever use one, Tariq?
I used an electronic manual typewriter. Does that make sense?
Like IBM Selectric thing?
Yeah. But it had like the actual little things that would go psh, 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 and all of that stuff. And you had to use the white paper.
The little things that went psh, psh, psh,
the teeth, the keys, the words.
Typewriter keys.
Yeah. It had
not words, they're letters, you imbecile. Okay. All right. Well, that's good. I used a Remington Rand back in the day with the pap, pap, pap. And man, you had to have strong fingers if you were anything other than two fingering those things. I don't know how people did that. Anyway, moving past typewriters to something a little more high tech, for the first time in history,
yes, we
have a commercial crew flying above what we traditionally think of as low Earth orbit, the 180 miles or so that the space station's at. Up higher than Gemini 11 did, which is a record.
big milestone.
An orbital record. They say the highest since Apollo, but Apollo left orbit. So if you're just talking about Earth orbit, this is a big deal. Not a place you want to get stranded out at 870 miles altitude, at least for the apogee. And first commercial spacewalk. And what else?
Well, you got the highest space flight by female astronauts. You got the first commercial spacewalk by a female astronaut. I mean, you got all these things. There's all these things in this picture. We're, of course, talking about Polaris, SpaceX's latest commercial flight, and the latest flight financed by tech billionaire by Jared.
And by the way, this story is from space.com. Let's not forget.
Yeah, this is from space, but everybody and their mother were covering this story, and it was a very long day yesterday because they did the spacewalk yesterday.
No whining.
No, I'm not whining. I'm just saying it was a long day. It was great. It was great.
Yeah.
But since we last spoke, since our last episode, SpaceX launched this mission earlier this week. As we're recording this, they reached that highest altitude that Rod was talking about. That was like on their first day in space. Then they did some kind of Earth to ground tests. They read a book from space that one of the crew members wrote.
Excuse me, but we're if you're on the video stream, we've got this great ghostly silhouetted shot of, is that Isaacman? I think
that is Isaacman when he first went outside.
Stand-up EVA.
Yeah, and so a stand-up EVA, this is really important. They didn't float all the way outside like the astronauts on the International Space Station when they do work and whatnot. They stuck most of their upper body, so they were kind of standing on little foot restraints sticking out of the hatch of Dragon. And this was a feat in of itself because it wasn't just the spacewalkers who stuck their heads outside that were at risk. It was the entire crew of this 4-person team. It's Jared Isaacman, the commander, who is the first person out the door, Sarah Gillis, mission specialist, and a SpaceX engineer who also went outside after Isaacman. Then you had the pilot, Scott Poteet, who was the mission director of Inspiration 4, Isaacman's previous flight, and another SpaceX engineer, Anna Menon, who is the one that wrote the book Kisses from Space for her kids that she read as well. But they were all in these brand new SpaceX suits, which you can see if you're on the video stream. Isaacman bouncing around. He actually tested all the flexibility. Can they stand on the foot restraints with their hands free and doing things? And
can I just jump in with a point? These are EVA suits. Yeah. So the main difference being until now, SpaceX and now Boeing have used pressure suits, which are designed in case there's an emergency. These are designed specifically for going outside the spacecraft, maintaining pressure, being nimble as much as possible. And given the bulkiness of the Boeing suit and what we've seen from NASA and the space station days, these things are very svelte. I mean, he looks thinner than me in street clothes.
It looks like a science fiction spacesuit. It really does.
It actually looks a lot like the spacesuits from the Star Trek motion picture. Anyway,
yeah, and including the helmets. The helmets, it's the same helmets. Yeah. They've got different tints on them to keep the sun and other I think like UV out and everything. But it was pretty amazing for an hour and 46 minutes, and that starts from O2 flow. Basically, is how SpaceX measured it, not from when they opened the hatch. This crew was exposed to the vacuum of space. Isaacman and Sarah Gillis spent, I think, on the average of 7 to 10 minutes apiece. This is Sarah Gillis as she's climbing out, if you're on the video stream, as she was climbing up out of the hatch. They had this new kind of handrail thing they called a Skywalker that kind of wait, what's the word? It
juxtaposed. Stuck out. Jutted.
Jutted. That's the word. That jutted out from the hatch that they could stand on, and then there were foot restraints as well that they could beat their feet in, so that they could stand and test all of the mobility. It was very interesting to watch because it was very methodical. But Isaacman did say one thing. He said to SpaceX that we have a lot of work to do at home, but that Earth, from his vantage point, looked like a perfect world. And I thought it was a nice touch because most of their 10 minutes apiece was really focused on the mobility tests of it. Right. So they didn't really wax poetic very much about the experience. But this proved that SpaceX can do spacewalks, that a company can build a spacesuit, that can perform in space. And while it might seem like a stunt, a tourist trip, this is a skill that not just SpaceX, but Axiom Space, Sierra Space, Vast. We were just talking to Max Hout in our last episode. They need these skills to build their future space stations, to build their future commercial bases or whatever. And this is the first step to show that it's possible. And it seems to have gone off without a hitch.
So I just have to say, again, cruising social media last night. And when I say cruising, I don't mean, I was looking for people that have a similar interest in poodles or something. I was looking at space stuff. And there was a surprising amount of snark and pushback and lack of charitable discussion about, all they did was stand up. Oh, all they did was this, all they did was that. And so I finally I try not to jump in too often because I really don't have any interest in arguing with most of these people because they're dingleheads. But in this case, I said, look, you might want to cut the guy a break. He built the world's first private air force, which he leases out. He has engaged the first 2 private space flights of their type that didn't go to the space station. And in this particular one, let's look at the record book. Altitude, the women, the size of the crew, first exposed to a vacuum since Skylab, on and on and on. And this is a lot of stuff for just some dude to do, because normally you have a government behind you for these things, and he's doing this as his hobby, which is very impressive.
And he's raising money for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital to fight pediatric cancer. So that's like a whole other thing. But we really need to put this into perspective, because it's very easy to see how some people can just look at this billionaire, space fan and think that this is a stunt. A spacewalk, and I credit Jim Benke for telling me this as a Cub space reporter all those decades ago. He told me that when any astronaut goes out in a spacewalk, you get your feet off the desk, you put your Pepsi down, and you pay attention because, and that's a direct quote, by the way, because spacewalks are the most dangerous thing an astronaut can do in space, because there is nothing between them and that vastness of the vacuum between them and instant death. We've seen close calls, right? Luca Parmitano almost drowned in his spacesuit. We've seen people have emergency pressure issues and rips, and they've had to go back inside. This is dangerous. These are brand new spacesuits. They tested everything that they could on the ground in vacuum chambers and stuff. They built but you don't know. And it was 4 people, not just Isaacman sticking his head out. There's no airlock on this spacecraft. They depressurized like the whole thing. It was empty. If they couldn't get that hatch closed again and sealed, that could be all she wrote, right? Unless they can get back down in time. And I'm sure they had an emergency plan for that. So it looks, oh my gosh, it's SpaceX. Look what they can do. Oh, it's a big stunt, meh. No, this is like a dangerous thing. And he did it. And it was amazing. And it looked spectacular because, man, all of those views.
Yeah.
And so we have to acknowledge that, because this is a capability.
We're at 18 minutes and we just finished story 1.
All right, I'm sorry, but it's a capability that if you want to have that sci-fi future in space, this is the capability that you need. It can't just be NASA and Russia and the agencies of the world.
China.
It has to be the company, and China. Yeah, that's right.
China's doing more than Russia is now.
And so it has to be. This is it's a tool. This is now a tool that these companies can use. And maybe SpaceX is the first one to be the contractor to do it, but someone else is going to do it too. So,
okay. Speaking of being a tool,
off my soapbox.
The FAA says it won't clear Starship Flight 5 out of Boca Chica until November. Because we have environmental concerns. Now, let me just say, we are environmentally aware on the show. We're both of generations that take this kind of stuff seriously. But at a certain point, and now this is my point of view. You may feel differently, Tariq, although, who would care if you did, but my point of view, Anthony's shaking his head. I came from the space race, right? It was a very patriotic, nationalistic time because it was us versus Russia. It's kind of fun, kind of scary sometimes, certainly with the Cold War and all that. But, the name of the game was America First to the Moon. Now, we like to think we're past that. We're clearly not, with Congress and so forth, rising to, and Bill Nelson at NASA rising to the bait we're in a race with China. But as I've said before here, I'm personally confident that China is going to do anything short of a suicide mission to get at least one Chinese taikonaut on the lunar surface by the end of 2029 for the anniversary of the revolution. So mark those words. I'm willing to take cash bets. But, so where I'm going with this is it's not like we're on a war footing, but it's kind of getting urgent. And Starship, which is supposed to be the first lunar landing vehicle, this semi-truck size thing that's going to land on its tailgate, has got to get flying and got to get refueling testing and got to get going, or we're just not going to make it. Yeah. And so what's stopping us? birds and turtles and fish. And,
Well, there's more.
I'm all for the environment.
There's more.
All
to
right,
it
go
than that.
ahead. Go ahead. Rip into me.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff that came to a head. It came to a head in 3 different places this week because SpaceX put out a pretty lengthy, what do you call it? Yeah, screed. They're really. It was very clear that SpaceX is really upset. They got fined for, I think it was for water pollution, right, or something like that, for the offload of their
Runoff. Yeah.
their runoff from the local environment agency, and
EPA.
that the EPA, yeah. They posted this big thing on X, formerly
God.
Twitter, about how they were really upset about that, and they were also really upset after they heard from the FAA that they weren't going to be cleared until November after their clearance for Flight 5, which we're all waiting on because they're going to try to land the Super Heavy booster. Had already been delayed to September. Like they were expecting to get the clearance in September, and now they get this 2-month delay, and they were very upset about that. And I can understand that as well. But a day later or so, there was a big hearing on the Hill where it was about commercial spaceflight safety, and House lawmakers asked the same issue to the FAA, and the FAA is saying, look, a lot of our processes depend on decisions that SpaceX makes, like if you're going to do, water runoff, etc. And they also said that SpaceX changed their flight profile for this Flight 5 in mid-August, which was after they already had been approved for a different flight profile, and to do that over and over again, so they could fly as many times as they want, or whatever that license said, after Flight 4. And so that requires extra review. And I do know that they canceled a lot of public comments too. The FAA did about Starship launches. They canceled all these public meetings after they heard about the fine that SpaceX was at the time facing and then later received for this runoff issue with the EPA. And so they had to look at that as well. So
now, excuse me, was this runoff from the deluge system? Right?
I believe so.
With
I
the
believe
pad?
so. But I could be wrong about that because I've been, my head has been on Polaris Dawn this entire time in Starliner.
Excuses.
So the scope of the environmental impact for Flight 5 changed according to the FAA because of changes in the flight profile, which require extra time. Should it really take 2 months? I don't know. I'm not a regulator, and I understand the frustration, but this is a new system, and I don't know why anyone thought they're going to be launching every month from the get-go in the beginning,
Yeah.
And so,
Well, the same reason we're going to be sending an uncrewed Starship to Mars within 2 years. Right?
Yeah, I mean, the rocket is coming
Elon's
back.
latest statement.
The rocket is coming back for Flight 5, and it's going to come. And if it goes off course anywhere near there are other towns, that if it misses by a bit, that could be, or other land that could be in danger. So I understand what they're talking about how the scope has changed.
Okay.
For it. So
We have to go to a break.
yes.
So I think we're gonna bag the Super Harvest lunar.
I'll mention something at the end. I'll mention it.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's go to a break. Very exciting. We get to come back and continue the Starliner Comedy Hour. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. So this hasn't been very funny so far for a comedy hour. So
I don't know why you called it that. I thought we were just going to have a good discussion about all of this back and forth about everything that's going on.
Because it's kind of funny. All right. So Starliner finally came home on September 7th to lovely, blustery White Sands, New Mexico after 3 months in space, launching on June 4th. And, we were waiting to see how that would go. At first blush, it looked like, the astronauts could have come back on it just fine. I just issued a press release for the Space Society on this, lauding NASA for their safety forward thinking, because you just don't know, right? And
you don't know.
Didn't know. And then we found out that it was only 1 out of 12. 1 out of 12 thrusters also failed. But it could have been 11,
There were other heaters. There were other heating, some were hotter than normal, but they didn't fail all the way down too. So, and
at least briefly, there was navigation dropout, right?
There was a GPS system dropped out, yeah. So
which is kind of a problem.
It would be.
Although,
however,
in my day, they came back without GPS. But just saying.
Yeah. We just looked at the big blue dot, right, and just aimed ourselves at that. So.
Aimed down. So So better than some predicted. There were people predicting, oh, it's going to burn up and all this kind of stuff. But again, a plagued program with far more trouble than we'd like to see. Now, is it important to continue? Yes. Will they? Nobody knows. There are some writers out there and think tank people saying they think Boeing's going to either sell the program or fold it up and just stop because they're upside down in it to the tune of, at this point, probably about $1.8 billion, which is a lot for a company like that. And, pretty clearly, they have not figured out a way to make money doing this, right? Because they have.
There were plans before. We can talk about that. There were plans before.
So they were going to do private and all that kind of stuff. And so far, other than maybe working with Orbital Reef, if this program lasts this long, that's the only external to NASA thing that they've at least publicly admitted to. On the other hand, as NASA will tell you, and as our position paper said, it's important to have more than one system. You don't want a space flight monopoly, which at this point, at least for the West and crewed spaceflight, SpaceX effectively is. Yeah, there's good reason for that. Their equipment works, and they're the most affordable thing that's ever come along for getting off of Earth across many different definitions. Nonetheless, you want, as we saw, when we had the flight stoppages with the shuttle that would go on for a year, you want to have an alternate system, but you want an alternate system that's affordable and robust, and so far we don't have that. And that includes Soyuz, by the way, because neither is that affordable. Everything's more expensive than SpaceX. So it's important to forge forward, Boeing. If you're listening, you're probably not at this point, but if you're still listening, we support you going forward. You got to do this, but we should put in perspective
what's happened in the last 3 months, though.
Oh, all right.
No, yeah. I'm just going to say we've seen the reasoning for why you want at least more than one provider on two different occasions this summer alone. SpaceX lost a mission. They lost a rocket flight, right? Uncrewed, but they still lost one, right? Polaris Dawn was the first crewed flight of Falcon 9.
Okay, wait a minute, though. When you say they lost one, this was not a rocket explosion. This was a stage that failed to reignite.
It was a second stage failure, but they put Dragons on top of that second stage.
Yeah, but that's what abort mechanisms are for, and they work. We know that.
Well, I'm just saying that you had that happen, and then you had this issue with Starliner, and both of them prove why you need a backup. And if you only had one, you'd be stuck like we were after the shuttle was retired in 2011.
Right.
For
or
9 years
after either one of those accidents with the shuttle too.
Exactly. So we should probably say what happened for the most part, because we're just assuming that everyone knows about Starliner, but it undocked.
Our audience is smart. But go ahead.
Shortly after recording our last episode, Boeing Starliner undocked autonomously from the International Space Station. That was Friday evening, September 6th. And
can you even remember what the day-night cycles are at this point with your schedule over the last?
I know
few
that was actually a 21-hour day for me. That covering that landing. But you weren't spending a 21-hour day. So if you were doing it together, then we.
Hey, excuse me. When I worked in production, I used to pull.
Yeah, but that wasn't Friday night, Rob.
36-hour days. So don't whine to me. But go ahead.
So then after 6 hours, it landed at 12:01 a.m. We do Eastern time. Because I'm in New York. But it landed back on Earth. We've got video of it coming back now, and NASA tracked it both from above and from below. In fact, I think that the astronauts on the space station were able to see it as well. And by all accounts, overall, the re-entry and landing was fairly nominal, aside from the fact that during undocking, they did some tests, and there was one of the 12 thrusters that failed, and it never came back on. They did see, like you mentioned earlier, during re-entry, this GPS dropout. Steve Stitch, the commercial program manager, said that it wasn't that big of an issue because it came back, and astronauts would have done procedures to bring it back, to boot it back up if they were on board. And they did see, however, some excess heating, not to the point of failure, but some higher than expected temperatures in some of the thrusters, which they've been monitoring for the issues that they've been facing the whole time.
Can I just insert a quick point here? Starliner is the first American system that is designed to carry a crew that's landed on dry land. Now, the shuttle landed on runways, but this is the first under parachutes. Apollo never did this. Dragon doesn't do this, although it was supposed to, but they decided not to for various reasons. So, Boeing took a chance on that using a system, I think, fairly similar to Soyuz, right? Breaking
Yeah,
rockets at the last minute and all that.
it has airbags too. Like, so the Soyuz doesn't have the airbags. So this one has airbags to cushion it so that I think you land at like 10 to 15 miles an hour, something like that.
Not much.
So I've been told the Soyuz landings feel like a car crash. That's how gentle it is. So this is a little bit better than that.
That's why they bring the vodka over to the hatch as soon as they're down. Okay,
but the parachutes was a big deal. People might forget that when they launched the last orbital flight, the reflight,
Starliner.
basically, to Starliner to the station, that uncrewed flight used a parachute system that wasn't rated for emergency loads, which means if one of the 3 parachutes was out, it wasn't rated to land safely with just 2 parachutes.
And that was assuming that the wire wrapping wasn't on fire.
Exactly. And so they redid it. They redesigned it. They did more tests, and it worked. It worked fine. To the point that Steve Stitch, we talked about him earlier, actually said during the press conference after the landing that if the astronauts were on board Starliner, they would have been fine despite the thruster stuff. Now, hindsight is always 20/20, and they don't second guess themselves when it comes to safety. They say, what is the safest option? We're going to do that. And in this case, it was keep the crew on board, bring them back on Crew 9, the SpaceX Dragon, in February. So that's 6 extra months, maybe 5 extra months. So the 8 of them
from here. Yeah,
from now. And then see how this goes. And then the next flight of Starliner has been delayed to August at the earliest right now of 2025, while they fix what they have to do for the thrusters. So, but it landed, and now they're going to study what they've got, but they can't study the thrusters. They were on the service module that was jettisoned during reentry. So
let me just step back for a quick overview. I can't imagine there's anybody listening that doesn't know the drama by now, but just so it's said, Boeing was selected along with SpaceX in 2014, although the contract was discussed well before that, for the commercial crew transportation capability. Each provider was supposed to provide 6 flights.
Mm-hmm. At least
6 flights between the U.S. and between the ground and the International Space Station. Now, Boeing got $4.2 billion for that, so a bit less than $1 billion per flight, versus SpaceX's $2.6 billion. And we've seen the results of each company, so go figure.
Well, Gwen
Shotwell, as you like to point out, Gwen
Shotwell said that if she had known what the bid was, she would have bid more.
True, but they didn't. And,
they didn't.
And look what they turned out, so you give credits to them for that. So SpaceX has flown 8 so far, right? 8 crew rotations?
They have flown 8 crew rotations. Crew 9 launches later this month as we're recording this. They've also flown 3 private Axiom space flights. They've flown Inspiration 4 and now Polaris Dawn. So that's like another 5 missions. That's 13 different crewed missions with a 14th on the way.
So the Crew Dragon...
and 1 test flight for NASA. So... fully 14 with a 15.
feeling pretty solid.
Yeah.
So that's where all this started. Both programs were late in delivering, but SpaceX finally got going in, I think, 2020.
2020.
Yeah, with Crew.
2017 was the target for both of them. 2017.
Right. So. And Boeing blew past 2017 by 7 years for Crew.
Yeah.
And it's, now the clock starts again. So, snarkiness aside, that's a lot of time, that's a lot of money, and as I said, Boeing's at least $1.6 billion, if not at this point $1.7 billion, $1.8 billion, and above that with reflights and fixes and all that kind of thing.
These are fixed cost contracts. They're not getting more money.
Right. This isn't the old cost plus thing. Which brings up an interesting point. Can shareholder-owned companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and so forth compete with companies like SpaceX that are, it's not all Elon's money, but it's private investment. And we don't know the numbers because it's not a publicly owned corporation. Can they compete in general, or is it just that SpaceX is so weird because it's owned by an alien that he's got all those Alpha Centauri secrets and nobody else can keep up? I mean, it's a puzzle, because other companies, ULA, Boeing, some of the small startups, are trying to assault the shores of SpaceX, which, let's bear in mind, up until the mid 20-teens wasn't what it is today. I mean, It was only, I think, 2012 that he had to sue the Air Force. So the Air Force was spending upwards of $500 million to do large satellite launches with United Launch Alliance and the
With
Delta
blanket
IV
contracts.
and so forth.
Like,
Absolutely. What's the word I'm looking for? Proprietary contracts. Nobody else could do it. And ULA was very comfortable doing that. SpaceX came along and said, hey, we can do this for $80 to $120 million. The Air Force said, right, kid, go away. So Elon did what any smart businessman did. He sued his future client and said, you have to let me bid. And once they did, I think they were glad they did because it saved the taxpayer 2/3 of the cost, roughly. So, this company comes out scrappy, hard fighting, and to the surprise of some and the relief of many, revolutionized launch. Oh, and let's not forget, they bring their rockets back and hose them off and fill them up and use them again like a water rocket. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to be impressed by this. So I guess my question, and then we got to go to a break before you answer it, is...
Thanks, Rod.
Well, I'll give you a chance to think about it. Why the hell is it so hard for anybody else to come close to this? And that includes Europe, Russia, China. India's just getting into the crewed spaceflight game. But, we would expect China with their, quote, private, unquote, vendors also working on this, with government military involvement, as we know. He's just running circles around all these people. And then there's Starlink and all this stuff. So anyway, think on that, if you will, my friend, and we will be right back.
I think that for this case in particular, your argument about
I'm not
like the pace for SpaceX versus Boeing. I mean, Elon Musk didn't succeed the first time. SpaceX didn't succeed the first time. They had failures.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hold on. This is the armchair Facebook crowd. Just one more time, if this is where you're going, Boeing's been at this since the 50s.
What I'm saying, no, you're not. You gotta let me finish.
All right, if I must.
So they lost what? Like they lost in the very beginning when they were trying to figure out their rockets. They lost a bunch of rockets, and then Elon kept putting money into it. And then the same thing with the big ones. They lost how many rockets before they're trying to land them? Before they were able to nail it.
Yes, a bunch.
And then I think that Blue Origin stole their thunder and landed like a month before they did in that December of 2012. But the key that I'm trying to make there,
with the toy rocket, right?
The key that I'm trying to make there is that there was an iterative approach, but also a very high threshold of failure tolerance at the beginning of failing there. And I think that kind of approach to developing what is all things considered like a personal space program at that point in time was very unique, and it's very difficult to replicate because companies like Boeing, companies or even countries like China, etc., you can't have that kind of failure. You can't have that, and because you have to answer to shareholders, not one person that has $1 bajillion
or that black van that pulls up in front of your house.
Exactly, right. And so I think that it makes it's a fundamentally different approach, no matter how much expertise internal you would have. And the expertise, Rod, I get what you say every time about Boeing about this, but that was how many decades of turnover and churn and brain drain, right? There comes a time where you have to start over again, and it's why when the space shuttles retired, we had to wait 9 years to have anything, and it's why there was never any.
It's part of the reason.
Too. Yeah,
there was also a lot of congressional interference and underfunding and administration changes and all that. Okay, I take that point, because there's a dying of intellectual background, and we saw this with when we had Rob Manning on talking about Pathfinder in 1997. They wanted the throttleable landing rockets that they had on Viking, and there was nobody that knew how to do it anymore. Now, that said, Boeing is responsible for knowledge retention of everything they do and every company they acquire. And I remember being down at North American. I think this was after they had been acquired. They were shutting down the Downey plant, throwing out literally tons of documents.
Yeah.
Now, how many of those were critical? I don't know. They didn't know either, though, because they were just literally shoving them with a skip loader off the floor of the factory. Now, it's expensive to save that stuff, but if you know you're going to stay in the spaceflight business, Boeing, it might not be a bad idea to keep the paperwork so you know how to build things.
And it's expensive to keep the expertise, like on call for how many
Yes.
years, while you develop new things.
Okay, so that's true. But you're, as usual with publicly owned corporations like this, you're minimizing expense on this end of the teeter-totter, knowing that it's going to go up on the other end if you continue that program. So they're very optimistic. Let's keep the shareholders happy. Ooh, I want to maximize my bonus this year. So we'll reduce costs and we'll pay for it downstream, which they're doing over and over again. Now, that argument, that you're saying holds some water. However, software design, everybody basically started from the same gate, let's say 2010, trying to design the kind of software, the advanced software to fly these systems. Again, Boeing had advantage because they had a hand in designing the space shuttle and its information systems and all that. SpaceX was starting from scratch. However, SpaceX seems to, and they have a very software-driven capsule, much more so than Boeing. SpaceX has, I think, 5 switches: stop, go, up, down, parachutes. And the rest of it's a glass console. Boeing is much more traditionally designed, and yet here we saw in their test flights failure to match up with the space station, clock settings.
Mistakes were made, right? They didn't do end-to-end testing from launch all the way through.
And that's kind of a big deal.
It is a head scratcher, like why you wouldn't do that. And that is a culture issue, and it's one that has been called out.
Corporate culture issue.
Corporate culture issue. And it's one that's been called out time and again in the development of this vehicle. And I think that's the difference. They are culturally, at their core, very differently structured corporations.
Okay, you're being kind. They're being run by the boardroom in Chicago that's got a flensing knife out and is cutting costs potentially at the cost of a crew.
Yeah,
and that's not okay.
I don't think that they're doing it like with, you know what, we're going to shortchange the astronauts. I don't think that that's the case at all.
No, but they're saying we're going to try and make more money on this federal program because we already lost $1.6 billion.
Because I just don't think that the people involved in building the spacecraft would let it get to that point, honestly. But I say that.
Do they have a choice?
And then we watched the first uncrewed test flight fail to reach the space station, and then we watched the second one launch with how much flammable tape and parachute issues with it.
As we discussed before we went on the air, now those very caring people you're talking about, for understandable reasons, have gone on. 34,000 of them have gone on strike. So to add to Boeing's woes, they've got a picket line surrounding the plant. Yeah, and we don't know. Neither of us know yet whether that includes the space division or if it's just the aircraft side. I suspect it's both because it's machinists.
I think, and we've talked a lot about the corporate side of this, and I know that we're going to talk about the actual vehicle stuff and the futures and like the origins of it in a bit. But I just want to make it really clear that I think that the fundamental issue that for what we're seeing when we compare it to the SpaceX, which is of the world, is that it's a very different company. They had a different process. Yes, I have said they had to start a bit further behind because they had to build a new capsule. They had to find a rocket for it. SpaceX had things to work on, but they did that by design because they were trying to get to where they are now already. They were already planning to try to get to a crewed flight option. And so I think that those play a really strong part, but I do believe that at the end of the day, there was an assumption that if we have trouble, there will be government money to bail us out.
Right.
And that's
clearly certainly a learned behavior over the many decades. Yeah.
And there was also an assumption that there would be a market for this vehicle beyond NASA. And we might talk about it earlier on, but their first partner for Boeing and Starliner and the Atlas V that they used was going to be Bigelow Aerospace, which dried up and disappeared. Yeah. And now there is no like tenant partner, whereas SpaceX has their Axiom Space partnerships, their national partnerships where they're flying other astronauts, their Jared Isaacmans of the world. And up until recently, they were selling private Starliner flights. I think they have one on the books with somebody.
I don't think so.
They had 2. They had sold 2 trips around the moon, and then one of them,
Starliner?
The moon, Starship. Starship.
Oh, Starship. Yeah. They had sold 2. Deer Moon collapsed, and that second one was a multi-passenger flight, but I think so far only
Tito, right? Tito and his wife.
That is Tito. Yeah, had signed up. So, and who knows? Maybe the guy who was doing Deer Moon will end up going on that flight. we're going to go to a break in a second, but before we do, I see Anthony fidgeting around in the background, who's our producer board op. That got an eyebrow raise. Anthony, from the perspective of a guy so much younger than Tariq and younger than myself, and you live in Northern California. I know you're very tech savvy. You follow the news. From the perception of a layperson, I mean, we all are, but Tariq and I are wacko journalists. What does all this look like to you? I mean, what are your perceptions of this whole grand experiment?
I mean, I haven't been paying too close attention, but it like, what you're saying about like the brain drain and everything, tracks. And maybe they're in the pre-show I kind of like brought up it's kind of similar to Intel, right? Where they they were the leaders, and then the
Intel chip maker, yeah,
just kind
really
of got overtaken through hubris, and
that's it. I think that it's the hubris part of it. It's like you think you're the best, and you're always going to be the best, and no one's going to come and get your and drink your milkshake and all of that stuff, and then you take your eye off the ball. That's what it is. To be fair,
right? Well, we're guessing. I mean, to be fair, we don't know how
it looks like to us.
Because I haven't paid enough attention. I don't know how their financial fortunes were running when all this ramped up. I mean, it's been 10 years. Yep. So a lot of changes have taken place, like airplanes that have trouble flying and things like that. And the moving of the headquarters, which, from the industry observers I read, they love to put that at the foot of blame and say, it's because headquarters separated from production, and you can't run a company from across the country.
That's at least not something for the aviation, though. Like space, a little bit of a separate animal. Would you not agree?
Well, I wonder. I mean, so yeah, and I give this talk on the lunar module sometimes to corporations. And it's like, here was Grumman back in 1962. Thank you for weighing in, Anthony, by the way.
I don't think you cleared that with Anthony before the episode started.
No, I didn't. That's why I enjoyed it, because I got this look like, wait, what? You're talking to me? I got to wake up now. So here's Grumman in 1962. They've been building fighter planes. They won the Pacific War with their fighter planes. Now they're building these tough, sturdy, not the fastest or sexiest jets. That's North American and others. But, they're very reliable major contractor building on cost plus contracts, I guess, building these military machines that have to be tough, robust, and fly over and over and over again. And now suddenly they're given this contract to build this thing called a lunar module that's going to fly only out of an atmosphere and once. That's it. Each one flies once. So it's a huge cultural shift. So where I'm going is, was this, despite their 60 years in space, just too big a culture shift? I'm talking really here about the fixed fee contract for Boeing to step up and embrace and succeed.
I think that they had to learn it, and I think that they learned a hard lesson that they have to be faster on the uptake for this one, and whether it goes beyond Starliner, we'll have to see. We should point out that Starliner is supposed to be reusable, and in fact, they did reuse the chassis for this one from the last test flight. That's why it had a big scar on it from the last reentry. So
I saw somebody post, 10 times, eh? I'm sorry, let me just jump in here, because I said we were going to go to break. Let's go to break and hold that thought. We'll be right back. All right, pray continue, my friend.
Well, no, I think that was what I was trying to say, is that I think that at the core, the lesson that comes out of this is that you have to learn faster, you have to change faster, and then you have to iterate to make sure that you get where you need to be on time, if these are going to be the contracts du jour for the foreseeable, which it does appear that they're going to be for the future. And it isn't just for Starliner and Commercial Crew. We saw it for Artemis 2, where there was very clear saber rattling from the government several years ago, where you had the vice president at the time, Mike Pence, saying that if you can't do it, we will find someone who can. And I think he said by any means necessary in his.
Well, now they're doing the same thing with Mars sample return.
Exactly.
Hey,
exactly.
JPL, if you can't cut costs on this to something that we think arbitrarily is fair and effective, then we're going to send it to private industry. And they've tried, and as far as I know, so far private industry has gone.
And look what else. Hard. Look what else is going on. You had NASA pull the next mission to
Viper.
Mars Oh no, the next mission to Mars off a brand new rocket, the first launch of Blue Origin's New Glenn, because they.
Oh, you're talking about Escapade?
I'm talking about Escapade. Yeah, the Escapade mission. Because they're not sure that New Glenn can launch in the window on the flight, and they don't want to take the risk of extra cost for that. So they're showing, hey, you gotta be there. You gotta be able to deliver, or they're gonna find something else. They swapped Clipper from SLS to a Falcon Heavy, and now that's gonna launch next month on time, like when they wanted to, instead of waiting how many years for the next SLS. Because they're all earmarked for Artemis missions. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off the point.
And that is a cost plus program, by the way.
Yeah. So I'm we're getting a bit far off, but I think that there is a larger trend, like you're saying, where they're gonna, like NASA as the tenant government, the U.S. as the tenant customer. We'll cut them loose if they're not going to deliver now, and that's a new lesson that these companies have to answer to.
So we have to make sure we save time for
we got to talk about more Starliner stuff.
Road ahead here, but speaking of Starliner, one weird thing from a media perspective, which is what you and I do, you more successfully than me, is Boeing stopped coming to the press conferences.
That was interesting.
Watching these briefings, and it's like, wait, where are the two chairs on the right where the Boeing guys are supposed to be? And that continued up through the post-landing press conference, which is where I was sure they came back, but supposedly at Boeing's request, they said, NASA, you handle it. We're, busy turning screws on the next Starliner or something. What's that all about?
I don't know what to say about that. I can say that from my armchair, it's not a good look, right? When you say that I can understand being tired of answering the same questions all the time, right? But at least at the landing, you would expect that they would say, did it go exactly like we had thought? No. Yeah. Did we learn a lot about the vehicle? Test flight. Yes. Are we going to learn what we can out of this and apply it to the next one? Yes. You would think that there'd be someone to be able to weigh in on that. And it was disappointing to see that responsibility get shifted to the side because we're not going to get answers anytime soon. That was one of the biggest fears about the shift towards commercial crew, is that you will get less transparency and less information on that regard. Now, this was a really difficult mission because it was very difficult to understand what was happening on any given day once it became clear that it wasn't going to be an 8-day mission. And there was a lot of hand-wringing trying to figure out exactly what was going on there, just to get the updates over time. I think that it got better near the end, but you would expect at least more than it wasn't really even a press statement. It was an update. I think we have a link to it. An update on the Starliner updates page that had the quote from Mark Nappy.
Sorry, but I wanted to, that was the next point I was going to bring up. So Boeing skips these briefings. They skip their victory lap after the landing because, they could have taken a partial victory lap.
They could have.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So they skip those things. Then you think, gee, I'll go look on their website and see what they said. So you go to the Starliner part of the Boeing website, and the updates there stop in like mid-June. So you got to dig a couple pages further in to find further mission updates. And they are the most terse, non-informative, sterile, neutral, we are investigating problems with the thrusters. And so, they really, somebody got the idea that good PR is no PR instead of the usual all PR is good PR. And they just backed away from it like it was a toxic thing.
I think that my takeaway, first of all, they had a separate website for the Starliner updates, so that's why you didn't find it on the Boeing website itself.
No, but I got to that, and it was still extremely terse and brief. That's what I'm saying. And you should be able to get to it from the Boeing Starliner page, which is just a storybook at this point.
I think for those 3 months that they were on the space station, the answer was always the same. We're still testing XYZ. Should they have gone into more detail about how they were testing it? Yes, that is my complaint. A little like this is what we did.
Okay, look,
we found, but
there's spin and then there's corporate honesty. I don't expect them to be completely honest because very few corporations are, but at least get out there and have some kind of public contact.
Yeah.
So they left it all in NASA's lap. And as we've discussed before, NASA comes to these press briefings. It's all about, working with the team, and the team is doing great work. And the thruster team is looking at the thrusters because they're the thruster team, and the thrusters are it's a complicated thing, and you really don't know, but the team is doing great work. It's like, guys, we're 20 minutes into this. Can you tell us what you're going to do?
Yeah. Well, they need to know, I think, what the NASA is going to do. I think that what we heard from, again, we didn't hear from Boeing, but from Steve Stitch and the other NASA experts, is that the early approach to deal with these thruster issues, because we haven't talked too much about it, but they get too hot, that overheating leads some seals to inflate, and then it chokes off the propellant flow into the thrusters. That's why they fail. And the initial kind of description for what they could do is change how often they fire these thrusters together. That means that they don't get as hot. That means that they don't mess up the seals. They don't choke off the flow, and everything is fine.
Well, and possibly redesign. So they don't want to redesign the thrusters because that's Aerojet. It's a contractor. God knows how long that would take or cost. SpaceX would probably do it in a couple of months, but that's it.
I don't know, man.
But they are talking about redesigning and replacing, or at least altering, not just the software, but the doghouse, which is the containment area in the trunk where the thrusters are.
We got
at least taking out some of the,
We got a picture of that on line 52.
Wow,
so,
exciting.
If we want to show it, yeah. So
at the very least, taking out some of the insulation, because apparently, rather than keeping those things at the proper operating temperature, they were retaining too much heat.
Yeah.
And, maybe that'll solve some of the problem. They're going to have to vacuum test it to see if they haven't already.
And if you're watching our video stream, the doghouse is that white vertical strip. That's one of them on the service module. There's a big.
And if you're not watching our video stream, why not? You can't see Tariq Malik, who
my rugged good looks.
So many women everywhere have said, I could just eat him up.
Oh my God. I'm never going to live it down.
All right.
I appreciate everyone's admiration. So
yeah, it must be nice. I haven't heard that for 25, 30 years. All right. But that's what happens when you get old and homely. Let's go to a quick break, and we'll be right back with our wrap up. So the assumption moving ahead is that we're going to possibly have another uncrewed flight test, although Steve Stitch, your friend at NASA, said not necessarily. So do you know where they're landing on that right now?
Well, right, I think that there's still like a waiting period. Boeing has a new CEO. I'm sure there's going to be leadership decisions that come out of that. Boeing, their Starliner team, has to study what they can out of all of the data they collected and decide. But we should also just take another look at like what actually went right on the mission, right? We talk a lot about like this kind of debacle about how it's 8 days and now it's 3 months. Oh, the thruster is this and yada, yada, yada. They launched 2 astronauts to the space station. Was it fully smooth? No. And, but they got there safely. They're up there right now. They didn't get to come home. Again, we've talked about that. The spacecraft survived that, not just an 8-day trip, but it survived a 3-month. That's half of a typical space station increment, so they know that there's longevity to this spacecraft now if they solve the thruster issues. And I guarantee you they will solve those issues. I don't expect them to need to do another uncrewed flight test.
But will they fly out their contract?
I think that they will. There's too much.
Which some are prognosticating might actually end up extending beyond the life of the space station.
It's possible. I mean, if the space station comes down before their contract's over, there must be a clause to say, hey, you got rid of our destination. But I don't know. I'm not a contract lawyer. Like, I don't know what's in that, like what bylaws and fine print is in there. I think that if a new market, if VAST or Orbital Reef or Sierra Space or those people, that are building private space stations get something going and someone wants a ride and SpaceX can't do it and they have an extra Starliner available, I think that they I'm sure they'd find a way to figure out how to do that. If Northrop Grumman can figure out how to launch their cargo ship on a SpaceX rocket, right? Yeah. Because they don't have one right now. I'm sure that they would find a way to fill a need if they get a market, if someone wants to buy a trip on Starliner.
Yeah, and as I did mention earlier, they've talked about working the orbital reef. So who knows? Maybe NASA would use one of its contract flights to fly some of their astronauts up there to do research or something.
They could fly them on Vulcan. Wouldn't that be cool? So.
Oh, Vulcan. So, but if they're going to do all that, maybe we ought to talk about, which we will in a future episode, standardizing spacesuits.
Yeah.
Because the one thing we haven't talked about is we've got this crew stuck up there in their big, bulky blue Boeing suits, which are cool.
No,
looking.
they don't have them anymore. They're gone.
But did they go back?
They came back. They came back on Starliner. Yeah.
Okay. So they're up there without spacesuits. That's even better.
I think Sunita Williams has one SpaceX crew suit, and they're going to launch another one up for Butch Wilmore for Crew 9.
But see, the thing is, they have to, which is weird. So on the one hand, NASA had said, well, you know, we didn't want to interfere, wanted to let these guys have maximum freedom to design their own suits. But what they ended up with is suits that required different seats to fit in, suits that required different fittings to hook up to the environmental control system on the spacecraft, and suits that have different gas mixtures and mechanisms for doing so in a place that's the most dangerous thing you could do as a human being in the cosmos, because as we know, which I wrote in Space 2.0, 2019, but still available in a bookstore near you, space hates people, and it will kill you any way it can. And, you know, by golly, one way, I mean, we saw it in Marooned in 1969, that
Gene Hackman, great film.
Forgettable movie where astronauts cry. Give me a break. But, you know, you've got to have the ability. It's like being a diver, right? If you're down, you're in trouble. Your buddy diver comes over and takes out the respirator and sticks it in your mouth. You need to be able to do that with a spacesuit, at least in an emergency. And as it is, if a SpaceX astronaut and a Boeing astronaut are side by side out in space with one of the suits failing, the other one just watches and says, gee, I'm glad I'm not working with your manufacturer.
Or as we saw in Marooned, our hoses are not compatible.
Well,
right?
which is exactly what happened here.
I like that we're quoting like a 1970s Gene Hackman movie.
Get over yourself. So
I love it. No, I love that movie. I have it on VHS. So
it was the last crummy studio visual effects movie made in that genre. But anyway, you know, you could see the wires kind of stuff.
It convinced me that you can launch a rescue mission in the middle of a hurricane.
That's because you were a child. So what happens moving forward with this? Is there going to be a move towards compatibility, or do we just say, oh, well?
I think overall you will likely see something like that. I mean, think about when you take an airplane ride, you do not wear your jeans to fly on an Airbus and then wear your slacks to fly on a Boeing. You don't need to wear different pants to fly on different airplanes. So eventually,
that metaphor got stretched so thin I could see through it.
Well,
wait, what?
I'm trying to make some kind of like mass transit comparison, and
but
like we talked about.
I'm sorry, but let me flip that. You shouldn't have to use a different seatbelt arrangement to fly on one jet instead of another.
Okay, there you go. That's better.
They're compatible. They're universal. You know, we need that in space flight for the safety of the crew.
Yeah, right? I thought you were going to say you shouldn't have to need pants to fly anywhere, but
what do you think I am?
I'm just saying you got a track record, Rod, and I thought you were going there, but I'm glad that you didn't. So
we're on the air.
But no, the point you make is valid. And I think that is the world that we will be getting to. Are we getting there fast enough? No. Obviously, when you have hurdles like this one, you did. There was a time where there were industry support to develop private spacesuits. We're not, I think it kind of flashed out, and you're seeing a bit of a shift back to it. NASA, I think Axiom is building a spacesuit for NASA for the moon. You have the
TVA
other company,
suit.
Collins Aerospace is building another one.
Are they?
Well.
I thought.
Or they were.
Yeah, that contract.
But then they bowed out.
They backed out of it. Yeah.
But and there were other attempts. Orbital Outfitters was another one. Final Frontier Design by Teddy Southern. They were in. They're in Brooklyn. That's really cool that they're there. You need to kind of get that market going, but then you need a vehicle. You need a company that just wants to outsource a spacesuit. And these two companies don't want to outsource a spacesuit. Yeah. So, because I believe that
SpaceX doesn't want to outsource anything anymore.
No, yeah. But maybe they become the suppliers, and it's just everyone's using SpaceX.
Well, at this point, you know, I think there are a lot of people when the job was given to Axiom saying maybe I ought to talk to SpaceX about a lunar EVA suit, and now they've designed and fielded an EVA suit. No private company has done that on their own before.
Yeah,
Once
ever.
again, another record.
Ever.
Thing. Yeah, ever. So I should. We need to wrap up because once again we've blown past the hour. But before I give you your final word, I just want to read this quote. I think this was from Kelly Ortberg, the new CEO at Boeing. I would say we've done a great job at fielding 2 transportation systems. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe that's NASA.
That
2 transportation systems in fairly record time. You're starting to see the market get fostered with non-net submissions, which is what we want. It's promising, but it's going much slower than hoped. Yeah, I think that was Bill Nelson. Sorry. And Nelson said of Kelly Ortberg, although we did not get the quote directly, that in a conversation after the press briefing, he expressed to me an intention they will continue to work on Starliner, work the problems once Starliner is back safely. Not filling me with confidence, but at least they appear to intend with the new CEO, which could be a game changer, we hope, to move forward with this and fix the deficiencies and get going with it. Because, all the other belly aching aside, it's a pretty solid spacecraft. It's a much more of a legacy design than SpaceX is, but sometimes that's a good thing. If they can work out these issues and get it to fly 10 times, at the very worst, maybe they end up selling it to another company like Voyager Space or one of the others and say, okay, here's your program. Go with it.
Or what Boeing did with the X-37, and they sold it to the Space Force, and the Space Force runs that now. That's a private space. I think one of them might even still be up in space right now.
Yeah, and it works really well.
It does. And so, I mean, I think we're going to get there, and I think that they will get there. There's a lot of questions to be asked, rightly so. But I think there was a lot that also went right. And I think it really is important to remember that. And they will learn from it. I think Starliner 1 will fly. Bill Nelson has said he's 100% confident that that's going to happen, that they're going to fly out their contract and deliver. And then we will see what the next contract is going to be. If it's a different kind of commercial crew thing and it's different companies that are involved at that point. Is it, commercial trips to the moon? I don't know, Rod. I hope to be there to see it. And we can complain about it.
What are you
like old
planning
geezers.
Are you planning to die of scabies before that happens? What do you mean?
Scabies? That is really specific to pull out. Anyway.
Well, I've been looking at your medical records, but go ahead.
So no,
rickets.
I know that everything. I just know that everything takes a lot longer than we like it to, and so I have to plan for that.
Well, you've done it again. You've spent over an hour with us. Well, if you're still here, on episode 128 of This Week in Space, the Starliner Comedy Hour. Tariq, where can we?
That laugh track just seems like we're not here for it.
Well, it's kind of old and rights cleared. Where can we find you bearding for Boeing these days?
Well, you can find me at, it took me a while to figure that out. You can find me at space.com. As always, this weekend, you will find me waiting on bated breath to see what time Polaris Dawn and Jared Isaacman and his crew will return to Earth. We think it's going to be sometime over the weekend and on September 17th. Everyone mark your calendars because we're going to get a super harvest moon lunar eclipse.
And what else do you get on September 17th, I ask you?
What? The eclipse? What?
Rod's birthday.
Rod's birthday.
I become an even older man on September 17th.
I'm the worst co-host ever.
I know. Have you ever written me a song? I don't think so. Which I am the only person you will ever meet who was born twice. It's a long story, but September 17th, 1950. So yeah, good.
Happy birthday, Rod.
Great. Thank you.
In advance.
Not quite yet. Was that a party horn or something more personal? Oh dear. Yeah. Did you notice he lifted out of his chair a bit when we heard that? And of course, you can always find me at pilebooks.com or at astromagazine.com because why not? Remember to drop us a line. Twist at twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv with a space joke, or we're going to come and get you. We welcome your comments, suggestions, and ideas, and we do answer our emails. New episodes of this podcast publish every Friday. Aren't you glad? Because this podcast is date night material for some people. on your favorite podcatcher. So be sure to subscribe, tell your friends, give us reviews, 5 stars, thumbs up, 5 party horns, whatever works for you. And you can always go, of course, to our website at twit.tv/TWIS. And don't forget, you can get all the great programming with video streams on the Twit network ad-free on Club Twit, as well as some extras that are only available there, like the fact that we snuck out some live content today.
Ooh.
On Discord. For only $7 a month, which really, what else can you do with $7 a month? I mean, can you feed a hamster for $7 a month?
I don't. How much do they eat? I don't know.
What can you do?
I don't know.
What can you do for $7 a month, Tariq?
For $7, I can subscribe to Mott Hater on Twitch. I think so. For my Fallout 76, for my Fallout 76 content. Yeah,
I knew you were going to go there. Okay, well, whatever that your passions may be, we would appreciate if you'd direct that $7 per month to Club Twit, because it keeps shows like this available to you for a very low cost, because it ain't cheap to do. So step up and be counted. You can also follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook, and twit.tv on Instagram. We thank you for the bottom of our hearts for spending 71 minutes and 18 seconds with us today.
Oh my God.
While we talked about Starliner, because it's important.
Hey,
and
that's almost an entire private spacewalk. Look at that. So
yeah, that's a good point. A little cheaper on our side, though. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Take care.